Let me just give an example of the algebra thing in going near to the far. And the thing which we have missed if we didn't do it the right way is the faculty of mind which is involved in algebra. So I'll just play with that a little bit, and it's just like a sampling of what it can be like. I'm going to play with you a game. It's a mystery novel. There's this little theft that took place in a little house where the person who stole jumped out of the window and he left a footprint. And it's a size 12 shoe and with a left toe that's bent. And that's the clue. With that clue, you can easily look around and find the person, isn't it? Because that's a unique clue. So I'm going to play a game with you of a person. In this case, the person happens to be a number. I'm going to think of a number and I'll give you a clue and you tell me what that number is. There's a very sweet little number. If I double him, you get 6. What number am I thinking? 3? Simple, isn't it? Okay. I'll give you a little more complicated one. This is another sweet number. If I double her and then subtract 2, then I get 6. Who am I thinking of? I double this number and then subtract 2 and I get 6. You got 4. What did you do to find this? How did you follow the clue? What did your mind do? If you observe, when I said I subtract 2 to get 6, you went back one step, unveiling one layer of the clue. If I didn't subtract 2, then it would be 8. And before that, I doubled it, and you get 4. So when I describe the clue in a sequence, you undid the sequence and found this interesting number. That's algebra. That's all algebra does. Your x is this mysterious little number. And what did we do just now? If I double x, I write 2x minus 2 equals 6. That's your algebra equation. What did you do? You removed the minus 2 and your 6 became 8. You removed the 2x, you removed the 2 from 2x and your 8 became 4. And you see here the process of how you solve an algebra repeated. But you did it without knowing any process, without knowing any technique, as a game. Now I'm doing this in a very quick, summarized form, but playing with this, I would develop the complexity of the problems step by step. Each time I would add a little bit more difficulty and a little difficulty. And I can assure you within half an hour, we would be doing complex algebra in our mind. I would be throwing at you numbers just like that and you'll just be solving them just like that, because each step of this addition of a little difficulty, the faculty of the mind involved in this is unveiling, developing. And at the end of that half an hour, that faculty would be bright and playing. And often when I complete this, children will play among themselves. Guess what number I'm thinking? And they throw a few clues. And that's how it works. That's your algebra. That's all it's doing. It's helping you find this little number whose qualities you know, and you're supposed to find who it was. Simple, isn't it? Yes, I enjoy supersaturating the mind because it helps us to transcend the specifics of the information and forces us to step back to get the feel of it. And because the feel is the key, and the rest is an articulation of what you already know. But to develop it further and then to ingrain it and organize our thoughts, I'd suggest some books which you can read. There's a book which is based on workshops that I have done, which is right here. It's called Introduction to Integral Education. There's a whole series of articles that were written by Sri Aurobindo on education, around which this is based. And he articulated this approach about 100 years ago as the approach which was the most rational for the future of humanity. And what I have done is to elaborate on that substantially. Yes, yes. And Beyond that, there are also a few DVDs in which some recordings from the workshops exist. You will find also there are many thinkers and innovators in education who have developed their own systems and approaches. But what we have described now is something which is so essential that because of its very essentiality, it is universal. And you'll find these ideas at the heart of all those systems, say the Montessori system or various other systems. The name slips my mind. But you'll find at the heart of all of them, all of these principles would be present. But if we recognize these in their essence, then we can develop our own systems and our own variations in classroom rather than being stuck with a particular articulation developed by someone else. I also want to point out that this approach is being practiced. I had the privilege of growing up in the Sri Aurobindo International Center of Education. That's the school in Pondicherry where I grew up, where we follow this approach as far as possible, as far as the teachers are able to, from kindergarten up to college. There are no exams anywhere. And our classes are typically 8 students to a teacher, which allows each student to get the personal attention that's necessary. The teacher knows exactly how much you know or don't know, and so you don't need exams. You see, you need exams when you're doing the mass processing to know how far someone has learned. But when you know your own children, you know exactly what they are. And how many children can you teach? How many children can you bring up at a time? 5, 8. If you go a little beyond that, maybe 10, but beyond that it becomes difficult. So you don't cross that limit. And in the framework of the curriculum, I've not touched upon this too much here, we not only tap the development of the intellect, but also the development of the emotions and the development of the body consciousness. You see, these 3 are deeply interwoven. The same part of the brain which learns the skill of playing the piano is also the part of the brain which you're using in your logical faculties and through which your emotional being expresses itself. So if you develop one of these, all the rest are affected. If you develop all of them, then there is a dramatic enrichment of all of them, far more than the sum of the parts. So in the development of the physical training, again, the focus is not how well you do your gymnastics and cartwheel, but how conscious can you make the body. And we have a comprehensive program which is compulsory, it's part of the curriculum, that in a week all the children go through a cycle of gymnastics, athletics, swimming, combatives, wrestling, boxing, judo, football, volleyball, basketball, the works, boys and girls equally. And that's 1.5 hours a day. And they're busy from morning 7:30 to evening 7 continuously. There's very little homework that needs to be given because you do everything in class. You don't need to do much at home. Whatever little is there is only for the later years. My conviction is that if a child needs to go for any specialized training outside school, then we have failed within school. What does the child do when he goes for tuition? He gets personal attention. And if tuition itself becomes big business, then again there are more children there. And after tuition, the child goes home and says, "Mummy, please explain to me." And what happens there? Personal attention. But if we gave personal attention right at the beginning, you don't need tuition and you don't need to have mummy's help because I'm mummy in school. But so my point being that there is a school which attempts this practice. There are many others I'm aware of within India who have developed or been inspired by this approach, which I could suggest the names of those schools, and if you're interested, you could further go into them, look up their websites and things like that. Yeah. It's a very important question, which I have to deal with. In practically every school where I've gone for training, that's the reality. They have 35 students to a teacher. So the point I bring them to is the recognition of the need for personal attention. And then we develop different means within the classroom for that personal attention. Just play with this idea a little bit. When you have a very large class, Whom do you teach? The average in the class. So if it's a class of 30 children, then 15 are above average and 15 are below average. So on the average, the 15 who are above average, they are bored because you're going too slow. The 15 below average are bored because you're going too fast. And on the average, nobody is happy. So the idea is to move away from teaching the average to teaching individually. Since I can't pay attention to 30, 35, I split the class into smaller groups. Because there are always those few in the class who already know what you're going to do. And rather than them sitting and wasting their time and doing mischief because their minds are idle, I tell them, okay, you know it. You're a good teacher. Come on, you teach others. And for them, it's deeply satisfying to take that responsible role. And in the attempt to teach others, they learn better. They learn to articulate. See, learning involves, remember, the last third step of articulation. That's when it completes the cycle. A lot of children know here, but if you ask them to explain, they start fumbling and mumbling because the capacity to articulate has not been developed. That's what they are training at when they're teaching, while the others are gaining the personal attention they need. What's this grouping we do? Typically 5 students in a group, and that's useful interaction. And then I follow it up. I'll invite those who taught for a summary, brief discussion afterwards, giving them tips and suggestions on how they could improve their teaching. And the point at the end of a whole class is everybody got the personal attention and everybody moved forward. No one was left behind. Yes, I get your point. We have the reality that we have to complete so much within the year. And we're stuck with that pressure. We don't have a choice. And there are many things one needs to do. The first thing would be to engage with parents. Make them aware that it does not matter. That what children need at this age is something very simple. They don't need all this extra stuff. And if we make it simple enough, we can get them to learn thoroughly what will really help them in life. And this message needs to be brought to parents first, and we have to engage parents in any change in our process. Assuming that's done or that cannot be done, or you do it as far as you can, you still have the problem in the classroom. So there I will point to this 3-step process where we allow children to go through a process of assimilation and re-expression. And the key there is when you give them that time for assimilation, and it's a book, it's a textbook you have to go through. We have done this bit, we have covered it, and then we say, now I want you to just think about it. Think of what you have read, think of what we have discussed. Does it make sense to you? And I want you to tell me what you have not understood and what you have understood. And that's when they start this introspective process, and that's the assimilation phase. And then you give them an assignment. After this, you tell me. Tell me something new that's not in the textbook, but which emerges from what we have discussed. Come up with a new idea, come up with a new insight, come up with something which this implies. Show me your creativity. So that will be the third phase when they re-express, and not mugging up, but coming up with something new, but derived from this. And that's how we'll complete. You could also do a variation of this to break it into small groups for discussion and for those seniors to teach the younger ones, and make a variation of that in the same classroom after your group interaction, and then bring them back into the group. That's another thing you do. One more thing, at the age of 14 already you can begin to introduce. Emphasize the importance of developing the power of concentration. Here I want to briefly step back and discuss something else. In all the informational content that we have absorbed over the years of our learning, what remains with you? Do you remember all those names and dates of history? Do you remember all those formulae of mathematics or physics? Do you remember the technical terms of types of mountains and clouds from your geography class? None of that remains. What remains with you? And I ask this question sometimes to students who have just completed an exam, their year-end exam for which they prepared the whole year. And a week later when I ask them, what do you remember? They say, nothing. Because we swallowed it and vomited it out, nothing remains. But then I point out, something does remain. You developed a capacity to process that information or that knowledge. You developed a capacity to work hard at something you don't like doing, at the very least. You developed a general sense of familiarity with different types of mountains. You got a drift of the historical development of things. You developed a familiarity with numbers and relationships of numbers. You developed a certain logical faculty in your mind that today you can think rationally in a structure. Those are the things which stay with you. What stays is the development of faculties, not the specifics of information. Once you recognize this, the whole class content can be tuned to developing faculties. What I do with teachers is when they prepare for the class, I ask them to list what are the faculties I want to concentrate on, rather than the informational content. Using the existing information of my textbook, which faculty will be developed? And then I concentrate on the faculty development. Informational content is incidental. Of course, it stays. But because we focused on faculty, the whole absorption is much more complete. Now, among all faculties, which is the one faculty which allows you to develop all faculties? And that's the faculty of concentration. If you can gather your attention and hold it in a pinpoint, laser sharp, then you can break through anything, learn anything, change anything within yourself. Everything is open to you. So, at the age of 14, they're old enough that we can have this discussion. And you can give the analogy of a laser versus a light bulb. And the laser gives 1,000 times less light. And yet, because it's one-pointed, it can burn through paper, metal, whatever it is. And that's how our mind is. We barely use 1/10 of our mind because all the rest is scattered out. If we can bring our awareness to a point, then we can learn so much more in less time. Point out to them that when they're doing their homework, if they're distracted, it takes so much longer. When they're concentrated, it's so much faster, and then they have free time. Once they understand this, they immediately begin to participate. You can give them exercises for developing concentration. You can teach them first, even in the class, to gather, center themselves before they enter the learning activity. And then they're naturally more concentrated. See, if you just breeze into a classroom and then open your books at this and then start, your energies are scattered. Center yourself, align yourself, make your mind silent. Use these words even. When your mind is silent, then you can concentrate. How they do that, we can leave it to them. And then we enter the inner state of concentration. You'll find just with that participation, so much more is achieved in the same class. There was a time in the ancient past when the teacher was the most valued. Even today, in some of the more ancient civilizations, that label teacher is still respected. But the actual teacher in the classroom is not, and is lowest paid, unfortunately. And that's somehow to do with the mindset of the age. But if we recognize the role that we play in the child's life, in society, and to ourselves, being true to ourselves, that gives us the strength, the courage, and the resilience to do what we have to do in spite of lack of respect from society. And if you have that innate self-respect, the child senses it in you and responds to it. They don't respect you for your flaunting of wealth, or even if others don't seem to respect you. But they sense this innate, I use the word, chivalry of a kind, a sense of self-respect and honor. They sense that and they respect that immediately. And I think that's a more powerful example which you can give. But it means that we need to align ourselves to why we took up teaching and what we're doing here. If we have that alignment, it will carry through. We can also explain to them when they are older that society goes through cycles. point out to how in the past teachers had this critical role and responsibility, and why they were respected. And how when that respect goes and education itself is neglected, society also declines. These are things which one can discuss with older children. And point out how there is a corrective movement also emerging. A recognition that something is seriously wrong. It'll take a while, but what you have is always more powerful than what you say. And as for the larger picture, our society, human society today, is going through a massive collapse. Because we built on artificial grounds. It's a house of cards. And it has to break. The question is, will we be able to rebuild from the grassroots soon enough that as the superstructure collapses, something else replaces? Or will we pass through a period of chaos? That's dependent on us. And that's why we're meeting here, because we can make the difference. And even though it seems bleak out there because we see the collapse of the superstructure, we don't see the grassroots awakening. But just as we have a certain awareness here, there are others. They may be individuals, some of them also gather. If they get to know that they are more like us, they will also find the courage. And that's the hope for the future. There is no other hope except our own grassroots awakening. What age group do you teach?
Elementary school.
Okay. The hope for the future is seen most prominently in the increasing awareness in the younger children. And the younger children today are far more aware than we were at their age. And they can see through, they can see the falsehood of things. They can't articulate it, but they can see it. And when we lie to them, they know we're lying. And when society lies to them, they know society is lying. They don't know what the truth is, but they know when it's a lie. And so it's important for you to say it. Say it in so many words. Say that this is how it is out there, but that's not the way it should be. And tell them that you have to change things. I have an interaction with students at the age of 10 or 11. And through the year, I'm slowly going through this process of developing their helping their mental development through a passage from the senses to the mind. And in the last 1 month before they leave me, I often speak to them of beginning with stories from the past, of the greatness and peaks of the Indian culture, and its financial, technological, scientific, philosophical, and other achievements, because that's their identity. But showing those peaks, I contrast it with the present and say this happened because we lost sight of our ideals. Because instead of aiming for the highest truth, we stopped with a moment's satisfaction or deception or lie. And then I point out to them, you have to build the future. And when it is put in this way where you resonate, connect to them at the level of the heart, they feel the truth of it because you're speaking the truth. And with the heart's connection, they feel it. They don't yet have the capacity to articulate in their thought, but that touches them and remains deeply imprinted. I've had children come back to me 10 years later and say, I'm only now beginning to understand what you tried to tell us then. The point is they didn't forget, but they may not have remembered the specifics of the informational content I gave, but they remembered because the imprint of that message was there in the heart. And this is how we are going to help this younger generation to find their way in life. And you may have to say it to them bluntly sometimes that it does not pay to deceive. You have to be authentic. You have to express yourself in what is true. And that's how we're going to rebuild our whole society. And tell them that there's a whole rebuilding involved. And they will know it. It's very difficult to deal with the politics, especially when we are more sensitive. In fact, the whole of politics is ruled by the insensitive, the hardened, the crude, and the rude. And because they are not affected by things, they trample over everyone else. That's how the worst gets to the top. But that's also because the more sensitive ones back off. When it comes to a conflict, we back off. I want to briefly step back and deal with it from a larger perspective. The divine manifestation in life has 4 components. There is a wide freedom, wisdom, knowledge. There is a power of effectuation, a dynamism which can break through all opposition and resistance, which can actualize that knowledge. Third, there is a harmony and a love which brings together and heals division and aligns things. And fourth, there's a perfection and beauty in down to the detail in the manifestation. In the completeness of these 4 is the divine manifestation. The part which we normally tend to ignore or we are insufficiently developed in is the second, the strength and power. And especially those of us who are used to being introspective, who attempt to be mindful, who attempt to be authentic, true, inwardly centered, etc. We are more sensitive. We are also therefore more fragile. We are weaker in that sense. And there is a correction necessary for that. Weakness is not divine. But crude strength is not divine either. It is a beautiful expression, a harmonious expression of power, which is divine, emerging from a wisdom. And if you have those other parts, the missing element is the emergence of strength and power. And I'm going to use this word power in this sense. There is a static power, the state you are in and the impact it has on circumstances without your saying a word or doing a thing. And then that static power flows in a dynamic action where you intervene with force or with gentleness. Even if you intervene gently, it can be suffused with that power. Like a father lifting a child, he does not lift with the intensity of his strength, but gently and yet with the full support of his strength. That's the kind of reach that must be brought forward. And this strength comes from deep within you. And it comes from some part deep within you which is unshakably. And you must find that first. And on the base of that, you then emerge into the action. Or I'll put it another way, find something within you which is vast and free and unshakable. A vast equality, a foundation of something unshakable. Find that. And that will be the base which will give you the strength and the power to deal with those things. It's not easy. It is painful because you are more sensitive. But you are going to have to fill that strength, and it will take time. But as you do it, you will find that with that strength, you can achieve so much more than others do with a crude force. And the result will be more lasting. The fear of failure holds us back often and can even hold us back from attempting. But the obverse side of fear of failure is the attraction of success, the attachment of success. It's that which causes the fear of failure. And if you were to let go of that, then there would not be the fear of failure. So the first step would be to align ourselves to what is right, direct ourselves to what is true, and just keep going. not having a fixed outcome as my defined goal of success, but moving in that direction as far as I can go to the best of my capacity, then there's no question of failing or succeeding. And the fear also goes away. There is also at each step the enjoyment of the step, the enjoyment of the moment, the fulfillment of the effort itself. And you know the result will come, if not now, eventually. And the result is in the effort itself sometimes. And if we can bring ourselves in this state of being and this perspective of life, then things become much easier. This is a very wide theme, and I'll touch upon 2 or 3 interesting insights. You're right, the city children have something the village don't have, and that is a sophistication and complexity of development of intellect. That comes from the complexity of life and the richness of sensory experience. And this is necessary. Unfortunately, and this is part of the problem of any evolution, every faculty can be misused. And the complexity of the mind developed could become a rich tool, but in its misuse, its greatest power is self-deception. When the mind becomes sufficiently complex, it can deceive itself, and so it does deceive itself. And that's why the necessity of aligning constantly each step of the unfoldment with the essence that we are. And then that self-deception is avoided. But that is one of the characteristics of a more complex mind, that it has the capacity to deceive itself. This is one. But the second thing we notice, there is, as I said, there have been rhythms of human evolution. We are now at a certain transition in rhythm where there has been an excessive focus in evolution on the development of individuality. And that's leading to so many other issues and the fragmentation of the society and family and so on. But in the fulfillment of individuality and the intellect which comes with it, the fulfillment involves the intellect developing itself to its maximum, including the power of concentration on multiple points. Now, this is something interesting which is unique to the present age. The mind itself of humanity is as if attempting to rise beyond a narrow intellect to a wide and complex freedom of mind, and even rising above mind to an intuitivization of mind, where knowledge would be accessed differently. And in this transition, there is a widening and plastifying which includes a stretching out and a multiplicity. So it takes 2 forms. You will see children today don't find it so interesting to go in depth. They like rather a wide picture covering many patches. They like to integrate a wide range of knowledge and experience rather than go in depth in one specialization. Contrast this with 200 years ago, where the natural turn was to specialize and live your whole life in one narrow specialization. Today they want to be wide. This is one form it takes. The second form it takes is the skill of multiple concentration, which I pointed out in video games. It's a skill, and it's a faculty of the mind to train it. And that's what they are attracted to when they do those types of activities. So you'll see children today, they're listening to the iPod on one side, they have got a book in front of them, and there is TV out there, and there's probably some other homework, or there's some chatting with somebody at the same time on the phone. Now it may seem so weird and so irrational and silly to us, but there's something they're enjoying in this multiplicity, and that is holding attention on several things at the same time. Now it does lead to shallowness, but the multiplicity is the joy of it. What we need is the correction for them to develop depth in a narrow point where necessary, and widening to multiple points, although shallow, where necessary. They will enjoy both if they're given opportunities for both. And depending on the age group, you might even talk to them, point out to them what it is that they're enjoying, and they'll agree with you. They'll say, yeah, that's it, you got it. and then show them the enjoyment of a narrow focus of concentration. So it's just stretching the mind's envelope to the maximum as a step towards a higher state of mind which evolution is leading us to. There is a time relation. It changes with age and it changes also with your depth of concentration. So say at kindergarten, the children can hold attention for a span of 10 to 15 minutes at a time in an activity. And what you do, our goal should be always, across anything we teach at any age, to somehow nudge forward the development of the power of concentration. So at this age in kindergarten, we give them an activity in which they find themselves immersed. And you'll find after about 10 or 15 minutes, suddenly they stop the activity, break out of that immersion, and look around. That's when they're ready for the next thing. So then you take them to the next activity. And again they play, they're immersed until they snap out of it. You move them to the third. And maybe 2 or 3 cycles are all you can manage, and then there's a collective game or some other more dispersive interaction. You observe how the mind responds and catch that trend, and then allow it to deepen bit by bit over time. At a later age, say after 10 or 11 particularly, when the rational mind is kicking in much more, then they need to rationalize and ratiocinate, think over things, brood over things. And you can give them those challenges to come up with new ideas, brainstorm, and so on. Play with their creativity in the assimilative phase. Later on, when they're self-aware much more, to the point that they can observe their own thought processes and play with their own thought processes, which say around mid-teenage or late teenage, at that point, the time needed for assimilation also becomes less, depending on the kind of activity. But if the concentration is great, then already there's a kind of an assimilation ongoing during the concentration of learning activity. And then all they need is some rest. And then they can get back to the activity. So you'll see children typically spontaneously go through this cycle. And if you observe, you get the sense of the time. They will work hard depending on the power of concentration, 15 minutes to half an hour to 1 hour, all the ranges. And then when they feel full in the brain, they come away, they chat, they wander off. They can't use the mind anymore. It's numb, so to say. And you watch how long that takes place. Typically 10 to 15 minutes if they have had an hour of study. If they had 15 minutes of study, then that time may be 5 minutes. And then they're ready to go back. What I would suggest is you watch how that child moves in his rhythm. You'll see that duration changes with the power of concentration. What I find is in different cities, in different cultures, these durations change because of the lifestyle. I have found a direct correlation between the time spent on TV and the shallowness of concentration. So when I interact with parents, I will often ask them, how much time does this child spend on TV? Or they'll say, not much. So I'll ask them to quantify. Oh, a little bit. Again, quantify. And when they actually measure, they come up with numbers like 2 hours or 3 hours. And the correction for that, it's not enough to say TV is bad, stop it. You must give them an alternative. The correction I suggest, and early on, is to get children hooked to the joy of reading. Reading involves an immersion of mind, development of the imagination, because you have to visualize. It's not like TV where it's visualized for you. And where you can also wander off. You can create your own world. But you're stuck with a track. So there's a deep concentration, but also all the other faculties of mind are active. And you develop power of concentration through immersive reading. It doesn't matter what you read. You like Harry Potter, go ahead. And you'll develop power of concentration and a rich vocabulary and a rich imagination. All the better. So once you look at things from the faculty side, you'll find a lot of fun activities are good for children and they can be encouraged. But then you tap them from the faculty's angle. Dealing with adults, there are 2 things you keep in mind. One is in many cases, those adults have had a defective education. So there are many layers of consciousness which have not been trained. There are gaps, so to say. That's what creates the problems they have. And you're required to, as if, go back and work on those faculties which were skipped or ignored. If you can identify what it is, give them an activity. An immersive, even playful activity, but which taps that faculty. And you'll find very quickly the faculty catches up. This is the first thing to do with adults. Second is, with an adult, train them or teach them to quiet their mind. That's a force multiplier in whatever they do, in any study, in any training of mind. If you can quiet your mind, you can do anything with the mind, including hold attention on one point or multiple points or whatever else. And if you do this as an active practice, it's actually enjoyable. And you can take 3 or 4 different approaches, starting with try to stop your thoughts by willpower. It's a fun activity. It's strenuous, but you can do it for a few minutes. And then do other activities like observing your breath or just opening the mind to an awareness above. These are different approaches, all of which may lead to an experience of stilling of mind or silencing of mind. And then from that state of stillness, you begin the activity. This is a fun exercise in itself, but it's a force multiplier for whatever else they do. We can't do this children as easily or as completely, but with adults you can use it. Once the mind is stilled, and if also the emotions can follow in the stilling, the corrections required for them take place also more spontaneously and more rapidly. At what age is this?
He's 22.
And is it lost? Isn't there hope?
Well, all the resumes come back.
Okay. In some cases, a child has a fixed idea of what he wants to do. Sometimes it's an idea caught at an early age and the mind is just fixed on it. Sometimes it's an idea infected by parents or by peer groups or just something dramatic they've seen. It may not always be their innate aspiration. What I would consider in such a case is go through an introspective process of why they were attracted to that idea. I'll just give an example here. There was a young child at the age of 10 or 12. His relative passed away from cancer. His father was a doctor. And this child resolved that he will be a doctor and he will find the cure for cancer. And of course, he was not good in medicine. He found it boring, he found it monotonous. It was not true to his nature. He went as far as he could, but now he's lost his way because his parents thought he must be a doctor also because they were doctors. The correction I would do is to go back to what it is that inspired the child. And it was not medicine. It was the courage or the heroism of new innovation that relieves people's suffering. That was the thing which attracted him, or whatever specific form it took. So if you go back to that, and from there evolve or discover a new form in which that essence can be expressed, we may find that the child finds deeper satisfaction in a different form than what he was first fixated with. And if he goes through the introspection and finds his new form, he will be just as happy or more happy because it will be his form. When we discuss the aha experience and the conviction that comes from your own self-discovery, it's that aha experience which I have tried to also communicate in all that we have discussed. And the test of the validation of all that we have discussed is, do you feel it to be true within you? And if that's true, it's obvious, it's simple, then that's all we need to move forward. And the beauty of the aha experience is that within it is also the strength of its expression. If we feel the truth of it in our heart, then to express it in the forms of our life is easy. I'll share with you an experience I had when I went through a kind of an existential crisis. And it was a question of, what do I do with my life? What am I supposed to do? Because anything I do is artificial, it's just another construction. And I went through a whole process of introspection and ripping off all the layers of self-deception, really. Eventually, I came to an experience which went something like this. I realized and I saw myself as this essence in relation to that, the ideal, a divine ideal. And that's the only thing which mattered. Everything else was irrelevant. So I said, oh, that's all it is. But what do I do? Because that was the big question. And then suddenly it became obvious. I don't have to do anything. I just have to be that essence. That's all. And when you are, action emerges. It flows from you spontaneously. When you are happy, you do the things which are happy. When you are loving, you do the things which are loving. You don't have to do anything, you just have to be, and the rest just flows from that. And that was the insight which came. And then it was shown 3 layers around that. It's as if 3 layers which were like veils, preventing me from being and flowing. And that's this construct of our mind, of our energies, and even of our physical atavism, which encase the essence that we are, the soul that we are. And the challenge is for us to be able to radiate that which we are already, which we know to be true, into ourselves, our own layers of personality. So to say, dissolve its rigidities and let it reflect more and more the truth that we are. Let it flow more and more spontaneously in alignment to the truth we are. And then that flows also in the rest of our life. But the thing which we have to do or be is already there. And I would suggest that we spend some time every day in introspection. It need not be a mental process, but just being centered in tune with our deepest aspiration. In the essence that we can feel deep within, that we would call the truth, the freedom, the beauty, the love deep within us, or that which aspires for these things. To remain in communion with that, and then gradually to emerge out of that, letting it spread into our whole being, and then extend beyond into our whole life, at least in our awareness. And then from that, then to move into activity. If we spend a little time every morning, perhaps, in this kind of an inner communion, it has its effect. What we are flows out naturally. It changes us as it changes our environment. And you will find after a while something of the perfume of that morning's sweetness of communion will remain with you throughout the day. And it's a sense of deep satisfaction and a deep causeless joy that makes everything else beautiful and worthwhile.